Chapter 6, 2007-2008. It turned out that India was a great place for Andy to be with Parkinson's disease. We quickly settled into routines there. Andy's schedule was just right for him. Awakening at first light, we often found an 8-year-old boy named Rinchin at our door, waiting to help Andy water the garden near the hostel where the children slept. The two of them would fill up buckets of water and talk, enjoying the responsibility of being the guardians of the flowers. Andy would then walk to join the rest of us for yoga, and oftentimes Rinchin would tag along before he made his way back to the hostel for breakfast. Our breakfast at the orphanage was always delicious and a social time for all the volunteers, since we ate separately from the children. The table was laid out with covered dishes we would all share. Usually we had porridge, eggs, parathas, bananas, and always that fabulous chai. As I prepared for school and organized last-minute ideas for the class I taught the children, which began immediately after breakfast, Andy laid out his drawing materials on a table in the big round tent used for fun gatherings. During class time for the rest of us, Andy worked in the round tent. Anita had requested that he design and build a 125-foot suspension bridge over a deep chasm that would allow access to fields where locals could grow food. Already some animals were housed on that land, a water buffalo and some cows. During the rainy season, some of the working staff had to wade through chest-deep moving water to get to them. This was a project that challenged Andy and used all his engineering skills from his university time, as well as his lifetime of building homes and workshops. He had never built a bridge before. He was also asked to design 2 gardens. I will forever be grateful that Anita gave him those assignments at that exact time. Designing gardens had been an unrealized desire of Andy's, and although he shook a lot and noticeably, his right hand still had enough stability to do all the drawing. Somehow it seemed easier to have Parkinson's in India. It is a country in which so many suffer with all kinds of deformities, disabilities, and trials, that one's own challenges seem to shrink in comparison. Strangers treated Andy with extra kindness and care. Of course, he was also a gray-haired white man, which in India commandeered respect and reverence like nothing else. It made absolutely zero difference that these qualities were unavailable to cultivate or aspire to. I was grateful that my husband, who had lost so much of his confidence and self-esteem during and because of his illness, was now being given special treatment, respect, and appreciation every day. After Andy completed the plans for the bridge and started buying the materials and supplies, the founders of the orphanage assigned Andy a crew of men to help him with the work. One of these men was Lobsang, a Tibetan refugee and former monk. Lobsang spoke very clear and correct English and worked as headmaster at the school of 65 orphans. He oversaw all the classes the rest of us were teaching and had his own small sleeping room at the children's hostel so he could be available if they needed him. While assigning him to work for the next 6 weeks with Andy, one of the founders said to Lobsang, "This is a big opportunity for you. And if you pay attention, you will learn from Andy." In India, we were frequently met with the assumption of a white man's superiority, and it was always a shock to us. After she left, Andy said to Lobsang, "I don't see our working together that way at all. I am the leader of this project because I designed the bridge, but I expect that we will learn from each other while working together." Later that day, Florence, the woman who cared for the children at the orphanage, approached me. She had tears in her eyes. "Lobsang told me what your husband said to him. We have never met foreigners with these kinds of ideas of working together and learning from each other. We are so happy to know you." One day, Andy discovered that the welders commissioned to make some big pieces for the bridge had delivered inferior work that would have to be done over. Andy and Lobsang felt frustrated. In discussing what to do and where else to go get this work done, a basic difference in cultural perspective emerged. Andy and Lobsang assumed they would have to find another business to work with, but the orphanage founders had another idea. That welding company owner was so clever that he tricked us. He was cleverer than we were, so we want to work with him again, they said. As unfathomable as that was to Andy and Lobsang, that is exactly what happened. This time, however, Andy stayed at the welding shop in order to supervise every step. The assumption that people will cheat you if they can was a point of view we were glad to leave behind when our time in India was over. After 2 months, Andy told us the bridge would not be completed before our departure. Lobsang and the crew will continue as best as they can, Andy said, but we'll need to return next summer so I can complete the project. Monsoon season was beginning, and we were ready to return home. His Parkinson's had not gone away, and his symptoms continued progression, but Andy was returning a happier, more confident individual. Arriving back in Delhi was abrupt, and our group was dropped at the airport for our midnight flight after a fancy dinner at a private club. Gazing at the departure signs, I said to Andy, "Our flight is delayed, but it must be a misprint because it says it's delayed for 2 days. We all laughed. It wasn't a misprint. The airline put all passengers up at the Sheraton Hotel for 2 days, and it was at the Sheraton that we all discovered just how much we had changed in 2 months. Andy had come to better terms with having Parkinson's, and I had witnessed him being productive, useful, and happy, even as his symptoms increased. We had time to use our lice-killing shampoo in those beautiful showers and to absorb the ways our lives had shifted." Taos, 2007. Back at home, we were again faced with the gravity of the fact that Andy had a serious disease with progressing symptoms. Since the bridge was not yet completed, we knew he needed to return to India to see it finished, but we had no idea if he would even be able to travel in another year. Our daughter had fallen in love with the children she taught and was already committed to returning the next summer. Andy and I decided to work and save so we could go back with her. I began my intense massage schedule and making jewelry for 2 art shows we were still participating in that year, and Andy continued his job, working as he was able, doing repairs at Lynn's home in Taos. One day he was sanding a piece of wood outside on the front patio, and a couple came over to visit. Our friend's home was in a small, picturesque development of mostly empty second homes. It was unusual for a neighbor to walk by. It was more unusual for them to come over and actually socialize. And what was even more unlikely was that this couple had a friend with Parkinson's who received stem cell transplants in Mexico and had benefited greatly. It was downright shocking to learn that this friend of theirs with Parkinson's happened to be a well-known man from Aspen who owned a restaurant where years ago Andy and I had enjoyed eating breakfast at least once every week. Andy came home visibly hopeful. I began communicating with Jyoti, the wife of Andre, the man with Parkinson's. She was open, friendly, and helpful. She told me Andre had lived with Parkinson's for over 20 years and that he was doing well, taking nutritional supplements and receiving stem cell implants annually or biannually. 20 years, I marveled. It seemed an unbelievable length of time to me. Jyoti said Andre was doing well. He had taken the drugs for Parkinson's for a few years, but had weaned himself off because of their terrible effects. I never spoke to him, but Jyoti gave us the contacts of the doctor and clinic for stem cell therapy in Mexico, as well as information about his comprehensive regime of supplements. It's good Andy's not on the drugs, because although it is a great honeymoon at first, the positive effects don't last, and there is a very dark side, she said. Jyoti was extraordinarily helpful and kind in sharing all she had learned about how to help her husband live with Parkinson's. She shared Andre's supplement list with me, which I found overwhelming. He took 23 supplements every day. One of the main ones was Mucuna, an herb from India that added dopamine to one's system. Parkinson's patients lack dopamine. I read several articles about the positive effects of Mucuna, which I was told by Jyoti was getting harder to find and more expensive. She also shared with us the name of the company that sold many of the supplements and nutrients on Andre's list for reasonable prices. Beyond a Century was a store owned by a man who had Parkinson's. I was able to have a phone conversation with him, and he was encouraging, but he did not have the same hard line Jyoti had about the drugs typically given to help control Parkinson's symptoms. He took small doses to help himself. We were discovering that each person had to find their own way to live their best life with this disease. Andre's stem cell implants intrigued us. Instead of months in China or a week in Germany, this was a one-day commitment in Mexico. Dr. Gonzalez's clinic was located just over the Texas border, so patients could drive or fly to South Texas and spend the night in a hotel. A van from the clinic would pick them up the next day for their appointment, which would consist of injections of stem cells from live birth placentas. This procedure cost about $8,000 US. Jody told us they went twice a year, and if we chose this route, maybe we could synchronize and meet each other in Texas. I loved what I knew of this woman and felt grateful for her openness in sharing what worked for them. The discouraging part for us was financial. It appeared that there were all these great possibilities for healing Parkinson's, or at least helping relieve the debilitating symptoms, and we could not afford any of them. We lived in a country that did not offer health care to its citizens, and we had never been able to afford health insurance premiums. We struggled not to feel inferior because we didn't earn enough to pay for all that we now needed. We felt like we lived in a society that, from a healthcare perspective, valued only the lives of the wealthy. Health insurance would never pay for these alternative treatments anyway. Whether we chose mainstream or alternative medical options didn't make any difference. We didn't have the funds for either. Andy started taking Mucuna and the other supplements on Andre's list that we could afford. We had been introduced to Ayurvedic medicine when we were in India, and we contacted an Ayurvedic center in Albuquerque and paid for a phone consultation with one of their experts. I spoke with Don, and he suggested a protocol of daily herbal supplements, enemas, and oil treatments. We purchased these from the Ayurvedic Institute, where Don worked. At the same time, we learned about herbal baths that were able to remove heavy metal toxins through the skin. We didn't have a bathtub or know if Andy had any heavy metal toxins in his system, but because research showed a link between these toxins and Parkinson's, we decided to give it a shot. Of course, at that time, we couldn't get blood tests to see if toxins were there because we had no health insurance or money to pay out of pocket. It was definitely a difficult time. We felt stymied and desperate. One of my family members told me that he believed we chose not to afford health insurance. It seems to be a never-ending dilemma that people who have enough money don't understand people without enough money. I reminded him that we never earned enough to be able to afford health insurance for our family, which affected us deeply and was one of the factors that led us toward alternative treatments. There was a bathtub at Lynn's house where Andy worked doing repairs, and she said Andy could use it. At that point, Andy was becoming more and more shaky, and we didn't know if it was dangerous for him to bathe by himself. Every morning, Andy took the Ayurvedic herbs and used the oils, and every afternoon after working, I would help him safely soak in the bathtub. Andy needed more and more help with his personal care. He needed me to shave him, brush his hair, cut his nails, and get him dressed. I also needed to feed him, and soon he was no longer able to work. His needs were invasive. I found myself unbelievably busy fitting his care into my days. Of course, I wanted to help him, but navigating the fear and resentment I had was really hard. There was only so much time in the day. Upon waking in the morning, I would do my personal care, and then Andy would get up and I would do his. I would do all the regular morning chores, including making breakfast, straightening up the house truck for the day, and making lunches for later. Usually I had to haul water to the kitchen and measure all of Andy's herbs. My least favorite thing was shaving him. Andy had an electric razor, and as I would circle and glide over his whiskers, I felt my patience waver. My guilt at feeling impatience would set in. It seemed to take forever. How can men stand to do this every day, I wondered. Next, I got to work. In the weeks I was home, I made and finished jewelry for the art shows we took part in. In the weeks I was away doing massage work in Chicago, friends and neighbors either volunteered or were hired to feed Andy each day and do some of the chores to keep the house truck a viable place to live. When I was away, Andy submitted to an extremely sedentary, quiet life in order to stay safe while living with Parkinson's. Before leaving each month, I cooked a week of meals and grocery shopped so there was enough food. I made sure all the water containers were full and laundry was done so Andy had clean clothes for the week. I went to the library and checked out a stack of large print books because they were the only ones possible for a shaking person to read. After preparing everything, I kissed Andy goodbye and drove to the airport in Albuquerque, hoping he would not fall when walking each morning to our outhouse. The week I spent every month in Chicago gave me a much-needed break. While I was there, my dad told me about his positive experiences seeking health care at the VA, and I began looking into this as a possibility for Andy. Once we attended a meeting and learned that when Andy was completely unable to care for himself, that he would be a candidate for something called aid and attendance. Often this benefit was used to pay for the veteran to live in a nursing home. The application was so long and confusing that most people needed professional help to apply. After the meeting, I asked the presenter if he knew of any other benefits for a veteran with Parkinson's who is not yet completely disabled. No, there aren't any other benefits for Parkinson's, he said. When I returned home to Taos, I decided to apply for aid and attendance for Andy. I printed out the application, which was indeed long and complicated, and tried my best to fill it out as his Parkinson's relentlessly got worse. Although this disease was crashing through our lives like a hostile army, we made the choice to go back to India so Andy could finish building the bridge he had designed and started. It was a calculated risk, and we hoped the kindness of the Indian culture and the joy of completing a project close to Andy's heart would outweigh the difficulty of travel and the suffering he endured every day. India, 2008. When we returned to the orphanage, there were a lot of changes. Lobsang had left, and not in an amicable way. He was now living in Dehradun in the Tibetan refugee quarter. We had been there on a visit the previous summer and were amazed at the cleanliness of the place compared to the India outside its gates. We loved the open, smiling faces of the Tibetan people. Lobsang proposed that Andy visit the Tibetan quarter regularly to be treated by a Tibetan doctor. Because his treatment involved Lobsang, the orphanage owners did not allow Andy to use the car and driver for these excursions. However, it worked out. Andy learned to get to Premnaga or Dehradun, where Lobsang would meet him on his motorcycle to take him the last few miles. In India, Andy was able to do things he couldn't do at home because he could count on the kindness of strangers. The risk we took in being there was already paying off because Andy was able to do more knowing there was help available if needed. Andy loved the Tibetan quarter. The doctor there was helpful, and Lobsang translated as he treated Andy with many herbal medicines. Some of these medicines came in very hard, round balls the size of a marble and had to be cracked with a hammer into powder form. The Tibetan doctor also did cupping on Andy's back, which left large welts that took a while to heal. Another treatment was called the golden needle. Andy returned to us after his first golden needle experience looking perplexed, maybe amused. I had a solid gold needle put through my skin at the top of my head, he explained. Then the doctor lit the top of the needle on fire and it got hot and felt strange. Were you scared? I asked. No, Andy said. It was weird though, and I decided I will take the herbs, but I won't do that needle again. In some ways, I think there is a quackery factor in all medicine. What works doesn't always make sense, and what makes sense doesn't always work, I thought to myself. We were learning that healing from any illness or injury required cooperation with one's own physical abilities and an openness to the wonders of life that go beyond our human understanding. Andy and I had always considered medical choices that were available in different regions and cultures. Allopathic medicine, defined as drugs and surgery, was standard practice in the U.S., but this option offered no cure for the illness Andy had or even any certainty of improvement. All the allopathic methods of treatment had very serious potential effects on the patient, including dementia and death. We chose to look elsewhere. In India, we found Ayurvedic and Tibetan medicine and explored them. We knew we were susceptible to quackery, but we hoped we would recognize it if it came along and stop it before Andy was harmed. Being sick was a risky business, and we were not always successful at completely avoiding mistakes. For example, the golden needle treatment turned out not to have any negative repercussions later, but Andy was a little shaken after receiving it. 2 months went by quickly, and the bridge was almost complete. Andy's spirits were high. This time in India was easier for us because we already had routines and connections there. A group of the children from the region of India called Ladakh had been moved back to their families the past winter, and we were concerned about them. We were told their whereabouts were unknown and their well-being was questionable. We returned to our country triumphant because the bridge was completed. The crew of men Andy had worked with were both his dearest friends now, and we felt bittersweet as we didn't know if Andy would ever be able to travel so far again and to see them. Still, we felt the exuberance of success and immediately drove to Ann Arbor, Michigan to participate in an art show and earn some much-needed money selling our jewelry. Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Taos, 2008. I don't recommend participating as an artist in one of the biggest street art shows in the U.S. when you have jet lag or Parkinson's, but that's exactly what we did. Setting up our booth, seeing artist friends, and spending 4 12-hour days selling our work was an uncomfortable immersion back into our home culture. It became apparent that Andy was not going to be selling anything to anybody. It was challenging enough for him to be there at all. Despite that, we had a successful show. We were all flying by the seat of our pants. Andy's Parkinson's affected everyone in our family. Andy and I, as a couple and as parents, were irrevocably shaken and financially devastated. We had been in challenging financial situations before, but we always knew, and our kids knew, that together we could and would work our way back to a healthier financial state. We did this through hard work and ingenuity and by sticking together. Now, the skills we combined to create income wherever we went had been cut in half. I was the one left to salvage our life while additionally being responsible for Andy's treatment and care. The best way our kids could help at that time was to be as independent as possible. All 3 of our children were living in New York. Brennan and Sky were both working as entrepreneurs. Alana had just dropped out of college after 2 successful years because she knew she could not count on us for the financial support she needed. She thought she'd better get a job and pay down her school debt and find a way to finish later. She was almost 21. Andy and I returned to Taos and again began our crazy routine. We lived in our house truck and I worked as much as possible. Andy continued taking the Tibetan medicine that he had brought back from India. I spent every spare moment I had searching the internet for possible treatments to help Andy get better. One that intrigued me was from a company called Research. Their website was extensive and offered a supplemental nutrient approach to healing neurological diseases. I read the information out loud to Andy and it piqued his interest. The reason the lifestyle-changing treatments we attempted hadn't helped very much was the same reason we thought the Research claims might help. Andy's entire life before Parkinson's was devoted to living in a way that promoted a healthy body, mind, and spirit. Andy's mom had embraced eating health food and taking nutritional supplements when he was a small boy. Personal nutrition was always an interest of ours, and we eagerly accepted the importance of organic and whole foods and the devastating effects of too much sugar and nutritionally empty foods. Our friend, Bill Stanley, from Kona, had returned to school at age 50 and graduated with a degree in diet and nutrition. He often sent us books with up-to-date ideas and the latest theories about the best foods for an optimal life. The knowledge he offered us complemented the lifestyle we were already trying our hardest to adopt. Training for the Ironman in Hawaii had shown us how to integrate cross-training and fitness into our everyday lives. Our work was intentionally designed to not only support us financially, but to allow for a healthy lifestyle of seasonal intensity, followed by a quieter time for creating new work and rejuvenating ourselves. The dramatic changes experienced by other Parkinson's patients when they shifted to an all-natural diet, regular exercise, meditation practice, and positive work simply weren't going to happen for Andy because he already did all those things. The supplements advertised by the Research company seemed to target the unique problems and deficiencies Parkinson's caused in a person's brain and body. There had been clinical research with positive results of some of the products offered by this company. There were clinics set up in Minnesota and Texas that were run by alternative as well as medical doctors. Thus began Andy's immersion into months of ingesting large amounts of amino acids. To make this option financially possible, we bought these supplements in bulk and made the pills ourselves. We bought a pill-filling device, and every day I would take apart the veggie caps and put one end into one of the 30 holes in the device and the other end into the other half of the device. After sprinkling the medicine into one of the halves, I would fit the 2 pieces together and squeeze them. Ideally, there would be 30 perfect pills, but usually a few wouldn't turn out. The duds had to be removed before the next round, and it wasn't easy to pry misshapen cellulose caps from the tiny holes. This was a recipe for frustration. It was another chore to do every day, and when I'd leave to go work in Chicago, I would have to prep over 1,000 pills. Regardless, we started down this path with a cheerful, hopeful attitude. We believed the claims made for curing the symptoms of Parkinson's by the neuro research doctors. We were dedicated to following this protocol exactly, and we did. Concurrently, we were receiving some more information from the VA about possibilities for drug treatment. Andy continued to be opposed to taking drugs because of their proven negative effects, but we had been qualified for treatment at no cost to us. I was working my butt off to earn as much money as I could, but we were still poor enough for no-cost treatment at the VA. Andy would often say, "All you can expect from hard work is a strong back." My back was getting strong. Not having enough money was becoming a long-term problem, so we were relieved when Alana moved to San Francisco and landed a good-paying job with a healthcare company. Over the next year, she significantly paid down her loans and then decided to change her life in order to help us. She wanted to take me with her on a 12-day visit to the kids at the orphanage in India, and not only that, but she was moving home to work in an office at the Taos Ski Valley for the winter in order to help me with Andy's care. I felt such relief at the prospect of sharing his care with someone who also loved him dearly and was grateful for a respite from all the organization of his care when I traveled to Chicago for work. India, 2009. The upcoming trip to India was a treat that I looked forward to in my busy life. I rallied our dear friends and neighbors to help Andy during my time away, knowing that I wouldn't be needing to call on them again for many months since Solana would be there. We packed, prepared, and made up a couple thousand pills for Andy to ingest while we were away. Our visit to the school in India was short and sweet. While at the orphanage, we met a doctor who was volunteering his time with the kids and treating adult volunteers with Ayurvedic medicine. Dr. Nisar Sheikh had a strong and humble presence. The kids adored him, and he taught us meditation techniques and gave us remedies and treatments to follow. One evening, Alana and I were out stargazing and quietly talking when one of the orphanage's owners passed by. "Michelle, please consider bringing Andy here to work with Dr. Nisar," he said. "He could stay here without paying anything. I am thinking that Nisar could help him." We kept this offer in mind as we returned home. Back in Taos, Andy and I found having Alana live with us to be life-changing. She was helpful in every possible way, and we were able to face the hardship of Parkinson's as a family, not just as a couple. Alana would shave her dad. Often I'd come into the kitchen and she'd already be feeding him oatmeal and making him laugh as she shared some anecdote from her day at work. I no longer made pills by myself, and I had someone to either laugh or swear with when the pieces of VeggieCap got stuck in the pill-making machine. Life was looking up as Andy and I prepared for our drive to Austin for an art show. It was a wonderful feeling knowing we had Alana to come home to. I finally finished compiling all the forms and filling out all 54 pages of the VA application for the aid and attendance benefit. When filling out the first page of the application, I made a choice to check the box applying for compensation and pension, even though we had been told by every VA doctor and representative we had asked that Andy was not eligible to apply because Parkinson's was not a service-connected disease. What they should have told us was that we could apply for anything at any time and set into motion a date of record. For the first time, I read that we would not be penalized if we checked the box applying for both. In one radical act with my pen, I checked that box. The application for the aid and attendance benefit had taken me months to fill out and compile evidence. One of the optional things we chose to do was submit statements of claim. These were statements from friends and professionals who were witnesses to Andy's condition. We asked 10 people to put their observations in writing, and when I read their statements, I saw how dire our situation really was. I remembered sailing across the Gulf of Mexico through a long and terrible storm and asking Andy if I should be afraid. "If you want," he said. We were in a different kind of storm now, and I knew that I didn't want to be afraid. Storms are a part of life. If life is like the sea and our vessel can only be proven seaworthy in storms, so we were learning we were life-worthy through the storm of Parkinson's disease. Austin, 2009. Andy and I packed our old Subaru station wagon with our display booth and all the jewelry we had made to do a 2-week-long art show in Austin. We stopped in Albuquerque on our way to Texas because Andy had an appointment with a neurologist at the VA hospital. His appointment was at the end of the day, and a winter storm seemed to be brewing. It was already getting dark as we walked into the hospital. Dr. Prindle was not a hopeful man, particularly about Andy's case. It was strange to sit in a room and lose respect for the person you were there to see. Every word that came out of his mouth and every examination he performed was negative. He prescribed the standard Parkinson's drugs and berated us for not already taking them. We filled the prescription and left the hospital with heavy hearts. In the car, I fed Andy dinner, and he swallowed about 30 amino acid pills, and none from the little white prescription bag. We started east on I-40, snow falling heavily. All our attention was required to stay on the road and not hit a truck or another car. Our Subaru would shudder as we plowed through thick, drifting snow, and I squinted to see through the blinding storm in the flash of clarity provided every 2 seconds by the windshield wipers. We forgot all about Dr. Prindle. All the way to Austin, through our booth setup and 12 days of the art show, we never allowed Dr. Prindle into our thoughts. Again, Andy stayed in our hotel room while I worked the show. One day, a dear friend offered to drive Andy to Dallas while I worked so he could meet the doctor who was prescribing all these amino acid supplements through neuro research. Dr. Speck turned out to be, according to Andy, a really nice guy with no idea how to help someone with Parkinson's. It was fun meeting him, Andy said. He is a lot like me. He had no idea why the supplements aren't working. I felt like crying. This had been another shot in the dark, and Andy's Parkinson's was getting worse. We needed a brilliant, cutting-edge doctor to help us through Andy's suffering. We had trusted the hype we read on the neuro research website and the professional voice we spoke with on the phone. It was deeply disappointing to discover that Dr. Speck had nothing to offer us. We had faithfully purchased the medicines for 8 or 9 months, and Andy had ingested thousands of pills. We had possibly participated in an elaborate scheme. We reluctantly turned to the little bag of white pills Dr. Prindle had prescribed. The show was almost over when Andy decided to take the prescription medicine. We thought it couldn't make things worse than they already were, but we were wrong. He took the suggested dose of small white pills, and 4 hours later took another. When I came back to the hotel on my break, I could not have been more shocked. Andy was writhing on our bed, obviously in great pain. He was conscious and able to speak through gritted teeth. "Everything hurts. My legs, my arms, my muscles are all screwed up. This is excruciating. I don't know what to do." Immediately, I checked the prescription and made sure he hadn't overdosed. I called Dr. Speck and left a message asking about an interaction of the drugs and all the amino acids in his system. I massaged Andy's aching legs and back. Never before had I witnessed him in such pain. He didn't want to go to the hospital and thought the pain would be gone after the drugs were out of his system. He could breathe easily and had no skin rash or other allergic reaction symptoms. I returned to the show and packed up. It was almost midnight on Christmas Eve. I didn't know how I was going to get all the boxes and panels loaded into the car by myself. Suddenly, I saw Andy walking toward me. His face was set in a pained, determined expression as he picked up 2 boxes. "Let's get out of here," he said. Some friends came up to him, and he pushed past them without recognition. I followed him trip after trip from the building to our car, placating our spurned friends with words of explanation. "I'm so sorry we can't stop. Andy is in great pain, and we just have to focus to get out of here. Please understand. Merry Christmas." "Please let me take you to the emergency room," I pleaded once we were back at our hotel room. "They won't know what to do, and it will cost everything we just earned," Andy countered. He was right. There is no way to explain to people who have health insurance the terror ones who don't have it feel about going to the emergency room. We were up the whole night. I'd massage his muscles, which seemed to give very temporary relief. Sometimes I'd doze and awaken with a jolt as Andy let out a pained groan or scream, and then I'd massage him more. By morning light, Andy had fallen into a fitful sleep, and I packed our stuff in preparation for the 2-day drive home and then shook him awake. "I need to stay here for a while more," he told me. "No way," I informed him. "No way am I staying here with you any longer. You have 2 choices, the emergency room or driving home. I'm up for either." We got in the car, and I began driving us toward Taos. It was a warm, sunny Christmas morning, and the combination of sun shining on Andy's face, the soothing engine rumbling, and total exhaustion put him to sleep beside me. He was not okay, but he was not screaming. I was exhausted as well, but kept driving. The next morning, Andy miraculously felt wonderful, and for the first time in years was able to shave himself. We drove the rest of the way home to our rental house and Alana. We were done with making pills and done also with the prescription medicine. Andy's Parkinson's symptoms had returned in full force after that one-day reprieve. We were back to square one, with no idea what was to come next.